As we head into the final sprint of the presidential election, campaigns are doing everything they can to organize and get people out to vote. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns takes a look at the impact a large group of voters described as the rising American electorate could have on the outcome in November.
A lot of us have this kind of like woke mentality where we're paying a lot more attention to the issues around us.
Voters like Dante Phillips are among the most coveted this election cycle.
If you really want young people to vote, you're going to have to talk about things that they're interested in.
A recent college graduate, Phillips is part of what's called the rising American electorate, made up of young voters, people of color, and unmarried women. Combined, these three groups account for over half of the people who voted in 2016. And in 2020, turnout among this group could be even higher if campaigns effectively engage them.
With the incredible energy and commitment to our democracy coming out of the George Floyd protests, we're seeing increased interest in voting and increased interest in learning how to participate in our democracy.
Tom Lopatch is the CEO of the nonpartisan Voter Participation Center, an organization helping to register and mobilize this group of voters during a pandemic.
We are living in a moment more than ever where Americans are seeing the direct connection between their lives, their challenges, their opportunities, and how government serves them.
But that doesn't mean they are willing to just hand over their vote.
I honestly think that 50 and under in the African-American realm are starting to realize that we don't have to be devoted to a party, that we need parties to be devoted to us.
Corey Prince is a community organizer in the key battleground of Wisconsin and has a message for both political parties.
The voters feel disengaged. They feel unheard. They feel that the issues that are important to them are not on the mouths of the politicians who are trying to be elected or want to be representing the people.
You're not seeing that ground level, person-to-person engagement that you're describing. You're not seeing that.
Not at all. Not at all.
While turnout among young voters and Asian Americans increased slightly in 2016, turnout among African Americans dropped. And overall, nearly 7% of eligible voters in the rising American electorate didn't vote 4 years ago.
Do you think that there will be people who say, why should I vote? What difference is it going to make?
There's like an idea that people are apathetic about this election. And I reject that apathy. And the only reason that I do is because I don't think it's apathy. I think the problem is access.
Victoria Sandoval is a 24-year-old living in Texas, a state with one of the largest shares of the rising American electorate. One barrier to voting is registration. This group is transient, moving between election cycles and less likely to own a home. They're also more likely to live below the poverty line.
I understand not wanting to engage with the system, but I also think that if every single person who is an eligible voter who feels that way did engage with the system and did vote, our country would look so different.
The pandemic and racial injustice are the major issues that cut across these groups and have become a rallying cry to get engaged in the process.
It is time for us to change our ways of performative action and to make actual change.
Enthusiasm is one thing, converting it into voting is another.
I'm not worried about people not turning out. I'm worried about how accessible this election is going to end up being for people who need to vote, whose voices need to be heard.
I feel like people are aware of the size of the demographic, but I'm not sure if they're aware of the impact, depending on how this election plays out. I'm sure people will become more aware of just like how influential our demographic is.
And the Center for Voter Participation and its partners have registered 1 million people this year and plan to send 37 million applications to vote by mail. And Elaine, I know we've been marking the 50 days into Election Day, but let's also remember that voting starts in 4 states this Friday.
A really key point, really fascinating piece, Caitlin. How could expanded vote by mail options help when it comes to turnout?
Well, what's really interesting in the research that we saw from the Voter Participation Center is that access to mail-in voting is more prevalent, or interest in mail-in voting is more prevalent among Latino voters and Asian Americans. In 2016, Latino voters and Asian American voters voted at a higher rate by mail than their counterparts in the rising American electorate. So the goal for some of these registration groups is to target these voters, but also in states where vote by mail is new and expanded. So not just states where they're used to doing it, but trying to educate voters on how to send in their ballot. This also could be a big challenge for members of the rising American electorate because they are a more transient group. They move between election cycles. So finding where they are registered and where their home addresses are could be one of the challenges to look out for.
All right, really interesting trends. Caitlin Huey-Burns for us. Caitlin, thank you very much.